The words were delivered like a death sentence, quiet and final, in the cold light of the morning room. "You will go to Blackwood Manor as a lady's maid to your sister," my stepmother, Lady Anya, announced, not looking at me but at her own reflection in the silver teapot. "It is for the best. Rosalind needs support during the season, and you are eminently practical." Practical. It was the word she used instead of plain, instead of quiet, instead of the 100 other ways she had of saying I was a ghost in my own home, a creature of dust motes and silence, defined only by the spaces I was meant to vacate. My father, Sir William, shifted in his chair, the newspaper rustling like dry leaves. He did not look at me either. His entire life had become a study in avoidance, a quiet retreat from the sharp edges of his second wife's ambition. He loved peace more than he loved his firstborn daughter, and so peace was what he purchased, and I was the price. Rosalind, my half-sister, at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Her beauty was a living thing, a warm, sunlit bloom that drew all eyes, and next to her, I was a shadow, a length of drab wool. "Must she, Mama?" she murmured, her blue eyes wide with a fleeting, useless pity. "Elara, as a maid? It is a position of trust," Lady Anya said, her voice turning to steel beneath the silk, "and it will keep her occupied. Lord knows she has no prospects of her own. This way, she serves the family's interests." The family's interest was Rosalind securing a title. The great prize of the season was rumored to be in attendance at the Blackwood house party, Duke Alistair of Blackwood himself, a man spoken of in whispers, a recluse of immense wealth and power, as cold and unbreachable as the granite walls of his ancestral home. My role was to be invisible, to press Rosalind's gowns and fetch her slippers, to be a silent cog in the great machine of my sister's social triumph. I did not argue. Arguing with Lady Anya was like throwing pebbles against a fortress wall. It achieved nothing but to draw attention to your own smallness. I simply nodded, a single, sharp dip of my head, and felt something inside me, some final, flickering ember of hope, turn to ash. I was 20 years old, and my life was already over. It would be a long, quiet fading, a slow erosion into nothingness. The journey to Blackwood was a blur of gray skies and rattling carriage wheels. I sat opposite Rosalind and my stepmother, a small, dark shape in a corner, my hands folded over the cheap, coarse fabric of the dress they had provided for my new station. It was the color of invisibility, a murky gray that seemed to absorb the light. Lady Anya spoke at length about the Duke, weaving a tapestry of rumor and speculation. He was 30, unmarried, and had not attended a London season in a decade. Some said he was scarred, others that he was mad, haunted by the tragic death of his younger brother years ago. All agreed he was formidably intelligent and utterly unapproachable. "You must be brilliant, Rosalind," Lady Anya instructed, her eyes gleaming. "Charming, but not frivolous. He values intellect, they say. Speak of poetry, but nothing too grim. And smile. Your smile is your greatest weapon." Rosalind nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration, practicing a look of thoughtful beauty. I looked out the window and saw only the reflection of a pale, solemn face that I barely recognized as my own. My own mind, which I knew to be sharp, which devoured books on architecture and ancient history, was a liability. It was to be packed away, like my own fine dresses, left to gather dust. Blackwood Manor did not loom. It grew out of the earth itself, a vast Gothic masterpiece of dark stone and soaring turrets that seemed to pierce the brooding clouds. It was magnificent and terrifying, a place of secrets and sorrow. It felt, I thought with a strange sense of kinship, like the architecture of a broken heart. As we were ushered inside, the scale of the place was overwhelming. The great hall was a cavern of shadows and echoing footsteps, dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to roast an ox and a staircase that swept upwards into darkness. We were shown to our rooms, a grand suite for Lady Anya and Rosalind, and a small, stark chamber under the eaves for me. It was clean and cold, with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking a bleak stretch of moorland. This was my place, the attic, the forgotten corner. I accepted it, I had been in training for this my entire life. The house party began that evening. The great families of the county arrived in a procession of gleaming carriages, their jewels and laughter filling the cold stone halls with a temporary, fragile warmth. My job was to remain in the background, a silent wraith at my sister's beck and call. While Rosalind descended the grand staircase in a gown of shimmering silk, a vision of blushing English beauty, I stood in the shadows of an upper gallery, a shawl she might later require draped over my arm. From my vantage point, I could see the entire ballroom. It was a sea of color and movement, a performance of practiced grace and whispered ambition. And then he arrived. The Duke of Blackwood. A stillness fell over the room, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if a cold front had moved in. He did not enter with a grand announcement. He simply appeared at the top of the stairs, a tall, severe figure dressed in stark black. He was not scarred, not overtly, but his face was a study in harsh lines and controlled discipline, his dark eyes missing nothing. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. He descended the stairs, and the sea of guests parted for him as if by an invisible force. My stepmother propelled Rosalind forward. I watched as my sister gave a flawless curtsy, her smile radiant. The Duke inclined his head, his expression unreadable. He spoke a few words, his voice too low for me to hear, and moved on, leaving Rosalind looking momentarily flustered, her perfect smile faltering. He did not dance. He stood near the great fireplace, a solitary pillar of black amidst the swirling pastels of the gowns, observing. His gaze swept the room, dismissive, bored, until, for a breathtaking second, it seemed to lock onto the shadows where I stood. I flinched, pulling back into the darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a fantasy, of course. He had not seen me. I was invisible. Later, there was a small crisis. A clasp on Rosalind's pearl necklace broke, the tiny beads scattering across the polished floor near the entrance to the conservatory. She gave a little cry of distress. Guests swooped in to help, a flock of concerned courtiers. Lady Anya set a scathing look in my direction. "Elara, make yourself useful. Gather them." It was a public humiliation, a clear demarcation of my status. I was to kneel on the floor like a scullery maid while my sister was comforted. With my head bowed, my cheeks burning with shame, I knelt and began to search for the pearls, my fingers tracing the cold lines of the marble floor. People stepped around me, their fine shoes and whispering skirts a constant reminder of my lowly position. One pearl had rolled under the leg of a heavy console table. As I reached for it, a man's polished black shoe entered my field of vision, stopping just beside my hand. "Allow me," a low, quiet voice said. My head snapped up. It was the Duke. He was crouching, his tall frame folded with surprising ease, his dark eyes fixed not on my face, but on the pearl. Before I could react, his long, elegant fingers had retrieved it. He did not immediately stand. He remained there, on my level, the pearl resting in his palm. The world seemed to contract to this small, impossible space between us. The noise of the ballroom faded to a dull roar. "It is a common flaw in that particular clasp design," he said, his voice a calm, resonant timbre. "The hinge pin is too fragile for the torque applied." He was speaking to me, the maid on the floor. He looked at me then, a direct, assessing gaze that did not dismiss or pity. It simply saw. It felt like a physical touch, like the sun on my face after a lifetime in shadow. "Thank you, Your Grace," I stammered, my voice a thread of sound. He placed the pearl into my waiting palm, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting instant. The contact was electric, a jolt of impossible warmth. He stood, his movement fluid and silent, and was gone, melting back into the crowd before anyone, even Lady Anya, seemed to fully register what had happened. I was left kneeling on the floor, the tiny pearl a sphere of heat in my hand, my world irrevocably tilted on its axis. He had spoken to me, not as a duke to a maid, but as one intelligent person to another, a brief, startling exchange about the mechanics of a clasp. And in that moment, kneeling on the cold marble. I had never felt so seen. The incident was dismissed by my stepmother as a ducal whim, a moment of eccentricity. "He is a strange man," she sniffed, fastening Rosalind's spare necklace. "Pay it no mind." But I could not pay it no mind. The brief exchange had planted a seed of impossible hope in the barren soil of my heart. I guarded it fiercely, terrified it would be discovered and crushed. For the next 2 days, I performed my duties in a state of heightened awareness, my senses attuned to his presence. I saw him only from a distance, a tall figure walking the battlements in the rain, or a silhouette in the tall library window late at night. He seemed to carry a profound solitude with him, a cloak as dark and severe as his tailored coats. Rosalind's attempts to capture his attention were met with a polite, impenetrable wall. He was civil, but distant. He would answer her questions about poetry with a curt, academic precision that left no room for flirtation. He seemed immune to her beauty, her practiced charm. It was baffling to Lady Anya, who grew more and more frustrated, her temper shortening, her barbs toward me growing sharper in the privacy of our rooms. She seemed to blame me for existing, as if my drab presence were somehow draining the color from Rosalind's efforts. On the 3rd day, I was sent to the library to fetch a book for my sister, who had decided that a display of literary interest was her next tactic. The library at Blackwood was my secret vision of heaven. It was a vast, 2-story cathedral of books, smelling of old paper, leather, and beeswax. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the thousands of leather-bound spines. I had never seen a private collection so extensive. It was a testament not just to wealth, but to generations of intellect and curiosity. I found the volume of sonnets Rosalind had requested, but I couldn't resist a moment's indulgence. My eyes scanned the shelves, my fingers itching to touch, to open, to read. My gaze fell upon a section dedicated to architecture, and I was lost. I pulled out a heavy tome on the principles of Palladian design, its pages filled with intricate drawings and precise calculations. Forgetting my station, my purpose, I sank onto the small stool at the base of the ladder and opened the book, utterly absorbed. The world outside, the house party, my servitude, it all melted away, replaced by the clean, logical beauty of archways and flying buttresses. The north wing is a particularly fine example of that style, though the original architect took some liberties with the fenestration. The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. I gasped, scrambling to my feet, the heavy book tumbling to the floor with a loud thud. The Duke was standing there, watching me. He had been there the entire time. My blood ran cold with terror. I had been caught, not just shirking my duties, but trespassing in his world, touching his things. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the floor. "I was sent to fetch a book for my sister. I was just leaving." He ignored my apology. He walked over and picked up the fallen book, his movements unhurried. He handled it with a reverence that I understood completely. "You are interested in architecture?" he asked. It was not an accusation, but a simple, direct question. I dared to lift my eyes. Yes, Your Grace. I find it logical. The way a building must be both beautiful and strong, a marriage of art and mathematics." The words came out in a rush, clumsy and unbidden. A flicker of something, interest, surprise, crossed his severe features. "An astute observation," he said. He didn't smile, but the stern line of his mouth seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. Most people see only the stone, they do not see the thought behind it. He gestured to a large table in the center of the room, which was covered in drawings and blueprints. "I am planning a new infirmary for the village. The foundations have proven problematic." He was speaking to me again, sharing a problem, a piece of his world. I was frozen between the terror of overstepping my bounds and the overwhelming urge to look at the plans. Hope, that treacherous, foolish thing, beat its wings against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You may look, if you wish," he said, as if reading my thoughts. It was not a command, but a quiet invitation. Hesitantly, I approached the table. The blueprints were beautiful, a web of fine lines and notations. I saw the problem at once. A section of the plan where the load-bearing walls were misaligned with the underlying bedrock sketches. "The buttresses," I said, my voice barely a whisper, pointing with a trembling finger. "If you were to shift the main axis by 5 degrees to the east, you could align them with the stronger granite shelf. It would require redesigning the nave, but the structure would be sound." I stopped, horrified by my own audacity. I, a lady's maid, was giving architectural advice to a duke. I braced myself for dismissal, for anger. He looked from the plans to my face, his dark eyes intense. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. 5 degrees, he repeated softly, a note of contemplation in his voice. He picked up a pencil and a set of calipers, his movements economical and precise. He made a few quick calculations on a spare sheet of paper. The scratch of the pencil was the only sound in the vast room. Finally, he looked up. "You are correct," he said. There was no praise, no condescension, just a simple statement of fact. But to me, it was a coronation. It was the most profound validation I had ever received. "You have a remarkable eye, Miss. I'm afraid I do not know your name." "It is Ilara, Your Grace." "Ilara," he repeated, and my name on his lips sounded like a secret, a word of profound significance. "Tell me, Ilara, where did you learn to read blueprints?" And so I told him. In that quiet, firelit library, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 stories, I told him my own. I spoke of my mother, who had loved learning, and who had taught me to read and draw before she died. I spoke of the books I had secretly devoured in my father's neglected study, the way the language of structure and form was the only one that had ever made sense to me. I spoke not as a maid, but as myself, and he listened. He watched my face as I spoke, his gaze never wavering, and for the first time in my life, I felt not like a shadow, but like a person of substance, with a mind and a soul that were worthy of attention. Our conversation was interrupted by the chiming of the grandfather clock in the hall. I started, the spell broken. I had been gone for nearly an hour. Lady Anya would be furious. "I must go," I said, grabbing the forgotten book of sonnets. "I am sorry to have taken so much of your time, Your Grace." "You have taken nothing," he said, his voice low. "You have, in fact, given me a great deal to think about." As I hurried to the door, he added, "The library is open to you, Ilara, should you find yourself with a spare moment." I fled, my heart a wild symphony of terror and exultation. His offer was a lifeline, a secret garden in the middle of my desolate world. Over the next few days, I found reasons to slip away to the library. Sometimes he was there, working silently at his table, and we would fall into quiet conversations about engineering, about history, about the Roman aqueducts and the Gothic cathedrals. He spoke of his travels, of the buildings he had seen, and he listened to my theories with a grave, respectful attention that was more intoxicating than any flattery. He began to perform small, almost imperceptible acts of kindness. A fire would be lit in my cold attic room before I retired for the evening. A rare book on architectural history would be left on the library table, as if by accident, open to a chapter he knew would interest me. When I accompanied Rosalind on a walk through the chilly gardens, a footman would appear with a heavy wool shawl, insisting it was on the Duke's orders, for me. Each gesture was a quiet message, a thread in a tapestry only the two of us could see. I began to feel a sense of belonging in this cold, magnificent house, a feeling I had never known even in the home where I was born. It was during one of our conversations that he finally spoke of his brother. We were discussing the use of iron supports in modern construction. His face grew shadowed, the ever-present severity deepening into something akin to pain. "My brother Thomas was an architect," he said, his voice tight. "Brilliant. Far more creative than I. He designed the new west wing of the London Conservatory. He believed he had perfected a new truss system." He paused, his gaze fixed on the fire. He was inside when it collapsed. The silence in the room was absolute, filled with the weight of his grief. "A flaw in the calculations," he continued, his voice rough. "A single, misplaced decimal point. He was so certain of its strength, so proud." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the raw vulnerability beneath the cold exterior. I saw the ghost that haunted him, the tragedy that had shaped his solitude. That is why I check every line, every measurement. That is why your eye for detail is a rare and valuable thing. My heart ached for him, for the brilliant boy lost to a simple mistake, for the brother left behind to carry the weight of it. Without thinking, I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. It was a shocking breach of every rule, every social convention. His hand was cold, but he did not pull away. Instead, he slowly turned his hand over and curled his fingers around mine. His touch was firm, grounding. It was not the touch of a duke to a maid. It was the touch of a man, stripped of all titles, connecting with a woman who understood his pain. We sat like that for a long moment, the firelight flickering on our joined hands, an unspoken understanding passing between us that was more profound than any declaration. But such secrets cannot be kept forever. The change in me, subtle as it was, did not go unnoticed. I walked with a lighter step. The perpetual gray cloud of despair that had followed me had begun to lift at the edges, letting in slivers of sunlight. Lady Anya's sharp eyes missed nothing. She saw the extra shawl, the way a servant would offer me a cup of tea, the flush on my cheeks when I returned from my errands. She began to watch me, her expression a mixture of suspicion and contempt. The breaking point came during a musicale. Rosalind was singing, her voice sweet and clear, and the Duke was, for once, in attendance. He stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed, his expression, as usual, unreadable. But I knew, with a certainty that thrilled and terrified me, that he was not looking at Rosalind. He was looking at me, where I stood in the doorway, ready with a glass of water for my sister. It was a fleeting glance, but it was charged with the secret world we had built in the library. Lady Anya saw it. I knew she did by the sudden tightening of her jaw, the venomous glint in her eyes as she turned to look at me. The moment the song was over, she cornered me in the hall, her fingers digging into my arm like talons. "What have you been doing?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. "What game are you playing, you conniving little wren?" "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice trembling. "Do not play the fool with me," she snarled. "You think I haven't noticed? The Duke looks at you, a nobody, a servant. You are trying to ruin everything for your sister. I will not allow it." Her face was a mask of cold fury. "This ends now. You will not speak to him again. You will not go to the library. You will remain in your room unless I summon you. Do you understand me?" Fear, cold and familiar, washed over me, but this time something else rose to meet it. A flicker of defiance, kindled in the warmth of the library fire. "He speaks to me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I do not seek him out." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Then I will make sure he no longer wishes to." She released my arm, pushing me away with a look of utter disgust. "You have brought this on yourself." I spent the next 2 days in a state of agonizing suspense, confined to my attic room. I was a prisoner again, the walls of my tiny chamber feeling more oppressive than ever before. The hope that had bloomed within me began to wither. Lady Anya was clever and ruthless. I did not know what she was planning, but I knew it would be cruel and effective. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived for the Duke. I knew because I saw the footman deliver it on a silver tray. It bore my stepmother's seal. A few hours later, I was summoned. Not to my stepmother's room, but to the Duke's private study. My blood turned to ice. This was it. She had done it. She had poisoned him against me, told him some terrible lie. I walked to the study on legs that felt like stone, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I knocked, my hand shaking. "Enter," his voice called. It sounded clipped, devoid of its usual warmth. I stepped inside. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the rain-swept moors. Lady Anya was there, seated in a high-backed chair, a look of triumphant sorrow on her face. My father and Rosalind stood near her, looking distressed and confused. "Ilara," the Duke said, turning around. His face was a cold, impenetrable mask. He held a letter in his hand. "I have received some disturbing information from your stepmother." Lady Anya dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I am so sorry, Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling with false emotion. "I tried to handle it privately, but my conscience would not allow it. The poor girl, she is not well. She has these fantasies. She has convinced herself that you hold some affection for her. She has been boasting of it to the staff. It is a deep, familial shame." The lie was so audacious, so monstrous, that it left me breathless. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes for him to speak, to defend me. He just stared at the floor, his face pale and haggard. Rosalind looked from me to the Duke, her expression conflicted. "She claims," the Duke continued, his voice dangerously soft as he glanced at the letter, "that you are mentally unstable, that you have a history of delusion, and that your presence here is an attempt to entrap me. She suggests you be sent away quietly to a private institution where you can receive the help you need." A madhouse. She was going to have me locked away. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. The little world I had built, the fragile sense of self I had discovered, was about to be obliterated. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath my feet. "Is this true, Alara?" the Duke asked, his dark eyes boring into me. And in that moment, the fear broke. It shattered, and in its place, a cold, clear anger rose up, an anger that had been simmering for a decade. I lifted my chin and met his gaze. The timid, silent girl was gone. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I did not know I possessed. "It is not." I turned to my stepmother, who was looking at me with pure, undisguised hatred. "You have spent 10 years trying to make me invisible," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You have told me I am worthless, plain, and a burden. You did it so that no one would ever look closely enough to see that you were systematically stealing the inheritance my mother left for me. You did it so my father would be too cowed to ever question you. And you are doing it now because for the first time in my life, someone has looked at me and seen a person, not a problem. And you cannot bear it." Lady Anya leaped to her feet. "Lies. Hysterical, wicked lies. Your Grace, you see how she is." "Be seated, madam," the Duke said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Lady Anya sank back into her chair as if struck. He walked over to his desk and picked up another set of papers. "Your letter was very compelling, Lady Anya. So compelling, in fact, that I had my solicitor in London make some inquiries this morning. It is amazing what one can learn with the proper motivation." He looked at my father. "Sir William, were you aware that your late wife's dowry, which was to be held in trust for your daughter Alara, was transferred in its entirety into an account controlled by your current wife just 6 months after your marriage?" My father stared, his mouth agape. "What? No, that can't be." "And were you aware," the Duke continued, his voice like chips of ice, "that the interest from this trust has been used to pay for, among other things, Rosalind's gowns, her tutors, and the lease on your London house for the past decade?" He dropped the papers onto the desk, financial statements, legal documents. "It seems Alara has not been a burden on your family at all. On the contrary, it appears your family has been a burden on her." The silence in the room was deafening. Lady Anya's face had gone a ghastly white, her mask of sorrow replaced by the stark terror of exposure. Rosalind looked at her mother, then at me, dawning horror in her eyes. "Mama, is this true?" My stepmother said nothing. She was cornered, defeated. The fortress had crumbled. My father finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, belated shame. "Alara, I did not know, I swear it." "You did not want to know," I said, the words quiet but unforgiving. "You wanted peace, and you let her take everything from me to pay for it." The Duke stepped forward, coming to stand beside me. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. He was with me. He was my ally. He addressed my father and stepmother. "You will restore every penny of Alara's inheritance with interest. You will make a public apology to her for the slander you have attempted to spread. And then you will leave my house. You are no longer welcome here." He then looked at Rosalind, whose face was stained with tears. "You may stay if you wish. You are not your mother's keeper." Rosalind shook her head, looking at me with genuine remorse. No, I need to go. Ilara, I am so sorry. I was blind. I never saw. I know, I said, and for the first time I felt a pang of pity for her, for the gilded cage she had lived in. They left. My father, a broken man, supporting my stepmother, who was shaking with silent, impotent rage. Rosalind gave me one last, tearful look before she followed them out. The door closed and I was alone with the Duke in the quiet study. The adrenaline faded, leaving me trembling. I felt as though I had run 1,000 miles. Alistair, I thought of him as Alistair now, came over to me. He gently took my hands in his. They were still cold. I never for a moment believed her, he said, his voice soft, the severity gone, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth. I know who you are, Ilara. I have known from the moment I saw you in the library, with your head bent over a book of blueprints, completely lost to the world. I saw a mind that shone like a star in a dark sky. I looked up at him, tears finally blurring my vision. She sent me here to be a maid, I whispered. I know, he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. And from the moment I saw you, all I could think was that you belonged not in the attic, but at the head of my table, as my equal, as my partner. He paused, his dark eyes searching my face. As my wife. The world stopped. The rain lashed against the window panes. The fire crackled in the hearth, but all I could hear was the frantic, joyous beating of my own heart. He was not rescuing me. He was choosing me. He was not offering me a place because I was homeless. He was offering me a place because he believed it was where I belonged. Marry me, Ilara, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Help me design infirmaries and libraries. Argue with me about buttresses and Palladian villas. Fill this silent, empty house with your intelligence and your light. Be my duchess. The tears that had threatened now fell freely, but they were not tears of sorrow or shame. They were tears of catharsis, of a joy so profound it was painful. I wept for the lonely girl I had been and for the woman I was becoming. I looked at this severe, brilliant, honorable man who had seen me when I was invisible, and I knew I was home. Yes, I breathed. Yes, Alistair, yes. He smiled then, a true breathtaking smile that transformed his entire face, chasing away the last of the shadows. It was like watching the sunrise over the moors. He lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound recognition. It was the end of a very long winter, a promise of sunlight, a quiet, certain sealing of two souls who had found each other in the dark. It was the feeling of finally being seen. 1 year later, I stood on the windswept ridge overlooking the new village infirmary. The stone was pale and clean, the roof slate gray against the autumn sky. It was a beautiful building, strong and elegant, designed with a revolutionary new truss system that was entirely my own. Alistair came and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me back against his chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his warmth a familiar comfort. We watched as the last of the workmen packed their tools, the project complete. "It's perfect," he murmured into my hair. "A testament to your brilliance, my love." I leaned back against him, my heart full. My father had repaid my dowry, his letters filled with a remorse that I had, in time, come to accept. Rosalind wrote as well. She had found a quiet life, married to a country doctor, and seemed to have discovered a happiness far from the glittering ballroom she had once coveted. I never heard from Lady Anya again. They were ghosts from another life, their power over me broken forever. The great library at Blackwood was now our shared sanctuary, the large table permanently covered in our commingled drawings and plans. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with conversation, with debate, with the quiet hum of two minds working in perfect harmony. I was not a guest or a ward. I was the Duchess of Blackwood, mistress of the estate, and more importantly, the cherished partner of the man I loved. He had not given me a voice. He had simply created the space where I was safe to find my own. He had not made me worthy. He had only been the first to recognize the worth that had been there all along. "What are you thinking about?" Alistair asked, his voice a low rumble against my back. I turned in his arms, looping mine around his neck. I looked into the dark, beloved eyes that had first seen me across a crowded room. I was thinking, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, about the structural integrity of clasp designs, and how a single, flawed pin can change everything. He laughed, a deep, warm sound that echoed across the moors. He kissed me, and in his kiss I felt the solid, unshakable foundation of our life together, a structure built not of stone and mortar, but of mutual respect, intellectual fire, and a love as strong and as logical as the arches we designed to withstand the tests of time. I was no longer invisible. I was home.